Day 706 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 384,000 military personnel losses, which represents an additional 960 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, 10 tanks, 29 APVs, 31 artillery, and 3 air defense systems. Oh, also mention the one jet, and I'll mention that one shortly. But let's flip the script today, shall we? Because some Russian accounts occasionally put out these supposedly Russian MOD-derived Ukrainian loss figures, which are confusing to say the least. But let's take a look now. So starting off, bottom left, 14,814 Ukrainian tanks and other armored combat vehicles, which is literally 10 times as many as the actual number is based on open source reports. And so take, for instance, Ukraine lost about 500 tanks total in this war, but they actually captured roughly 600 Russian tanks of varying quality throughout the war. So then it's not exactly so much of a deficit, is it? But back to these figures, because Ukraine never even had the nearly 15,000 tanks and other combat vehicles to spare. It's just an absurd figure. Then aircraft, 568 and 265 helicopters, which is about 5 times the size of Ukraine's air force, so there's that glaringly obvious mistake as well. But perhaps my favourite figure shown here might be the 11,000 odd unmanned aerial vehicles. And not because it's too high a figure presented here, oh no, on the contrary, because of it being a drastically reduced figure when you take into consideration all of the Russian tanks and vehicles driving themselves into poor unsuspecting Ukrainian FPV drones. But on a serious note, my assessment, it's a cheap copy of the daily consistent Ukrainian reports about Russian losses. And I do mean a cheap copy because it doesn't specify anything in the form of Ukrainian military personnel losses, plus it doesn't even cite the data providing source. Like, who exactly is this information coming from? I know it purports to be from the Russian MOD just by way of the information that we see here, but then why not type that in? And really, why not try to legitimize it even more with their logo as well? Now I'm just doing their job for them. And you've probably already noticed a number of other things wrong with this information, such as the nearly 500 air defense complexes of Ukraine's that have supposedly been destroyed, and the near 8,000 artillery pieces destroyed. So, okay, if you say so. Then we'll head across to the map and we'll start out for a moment in the Belgorod Oblast today, as in what appears to be something that's becoming quite the routine occurrence. A Russian aircraft lost 2 Fab 250 glide munitions in the Belgorod region, which is likely due to undertrained Russian personnel and probably also due to Russia's aging and unmaintained aircraft fleets with their dilapidated mounting points. Then moving into Ukraine's Donbass region, as Ukrainian forces continue to repel large-scale Russian assaults east of Terny. And as a result, several more Russian armored vehicles were destroyed today. And Russian ground forces really seem to be gunning for this area right now. And perhaps they'd like to take it all the way up to the lake, river, and the high ground, then call it a day. Well, even then, Putin says Russian borders end nowhere, so the Russian forces might never stop until their ground forces are largely demilitarized, and that's kind of the point. Although all of this land I've mentioned just here, so east of the river, is roughly the size of Bakhmut and Avdiivka combined, so the Russian forces would have their work certainly cut out for them there. Then, somewhere in the east, a Ukrainian Stugna P ATGM slams into the side of an advancing Russian BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicle, and that happened roughly around the Bakhmut region. Then somewhere in the south, footage from a Western supplied SAM system, so surface to air missile system in Ukrainian service, seen here down in a Russian Zala surveillance drone near the front lines. Then, also in the east, a Russian Su-34 fighter jet was shot down over the Luhansk region, as announced by Andriy Kovalov, the spokesperson for the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Now, this one is pretty breaking news, with not a lot of released information on the details just yet, but the jet was likely performing frontline air support operations and came within too close a range to AFU air defenses. Then we'll head all the way down to Pryutne in the Zaporizhia Oblast, which has indeed, it's been a while since we've been here, as in terms of seeing any activity or change in the front line positions. Although in this instance, the Russian forces advanced a little bit just north of the settlement of Pryutne into some somewhat constricting water bodies. And it's always a risky move for either side to hold land for, as you are in some respects trapped in by the very nature of the land obstacles with nowhere to run when needed. And we actually saw that problem for the Russian forces sometime last year when Ukraine was taking all of this liberated chunk of green change right there. Then moving more west, but still in the oblast, Ukrainian artillery using cluster munitions hit and destroyed a large assault group of Russian forces northwest of Novoprokopivka. Then moving more east again, as interestingly, the spokeswoman for Ukraine's Southern Command confirmed that more Ukrainian troops managed to advance on the south bank of the Dnipro River. Without specifying where, though currently it is known that Ukrainian aviation and artillery is working massively in this sector. And so then what we heard from the Russian forces in this region was, well, most recently how they stated that Ukrainians now have access to a large number of night vision FPV drones. This guy also stated the night vision drones hunt for all their Russian vehicles at night and warns his comrades to be careful. Then we'll head across to some news for today. So the EU plans to use billions from profits of frozen Russian bank assets to support Ukraine. The Financial Times revealed. Proposal from December now aims to allocate around 15 billion euros from these profits to Ukraine over 5 years. The approach will follow EU and international laws and only affect future profits, with finalisation expected soon. Although I'm sure at some point the actual frozen capital itself will find a way to be accessed in assistance of Ukraine, some hundreds of billions of euros right there. And then in some similar news, so secret internal documents have reportedly shown that the EU has a plan to cut financial support to Hungary and weaken its economy if it keeps blocking aid to Ukraine. Meanwhile, and perhaps in light of this news, Hungary is open to negotiating about the 50 billion euro aid for Ukraine, as per an advisor to Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Then in some other related news, so the Croatian court ruled to give Ukraine Viktor Medvedchuk's $200 million yacht. So $200 million US yacht in worth. It's called the Royal Romance, as reported by Elena Duma of the Asset Management Agency. Now, Medvedchuk, a former Ukrainian lawmaker with connections to Putin, was arrested in 2022 for treason. Then he was later traded to Russia in a prisoner exchange. So the proceeds from that yacht are clearly fair game for Ukraine. Then in some other news, there's some new figures out showing that in 2023, Russia only started opening 3 new oil and gas field sites, which was a sharp drop from the 193 fields launched over the previous 5 years. So this slow start reflects expectations of stagnant production in the near future and a decline later on, aligning with many analysts' predictions. Now, although Russian gas and oil companies like Rosneft, Lukoil, Rusneft, and Gazprom have plans to start or increase production at various fields across Russia, the overall decline in drilling activity indicates a shift towards more challenging and costly extraction, with more oil and gas reserves requiring complex extraction methods, which is why the West came into Russia in the first place, as it pertains to gas and oil, to actually achieve some decent extraction outcomes. But now, the unavailability of Western technology due to sanctions and a focus on less advanced drilling methods could lead to less efficient and costlier production for Russia, forcing the future of the Russian economic growth platform to rely significantly less on this diminishing sector. Then in some other news, so in Russia, a 72-year-old pensioner received a 5.5-year prison sentence for sharing 2 social media posts. The posts involved data about Russian military casualties within Ukraine, of course, followed by a correlating video. So, Russia's latest public enemy number 1, the babushkas. Then in another Russian military mobilization blunder segment, so remember that smoking incident at the Russian version of Amazon, it's called Wildberries, that happened a few weeks back? Well, new reports have now come out confirming what was previously suspected, that higher management participated in forced mobilization by ousting the personnel onto the street where recruitment officers were waiting for them. And it's actually turning into quite a common practice in Russia now. They're called slave tolls, where big business in Russia gets the call from the Kremlin, as these companies are particularly well positioned to oust their migrant workers. What a disgrace, and what a continued act of Russian desperation. Then moving across to a quick funny to round it all off for today, guys. So there was some recent Russian propaganda that claimed Zelensky's left hand has an evil tattoo, while Zelensky was also taking a photo of himself from 3 feet away. Epic fail. And propaganda, which is only made worse by the fact that when you check this Russian Twitter page, it still has the post up. So I think they still don't even realize it yet. Ah, Russia. In some ways, their propaganda machine is not even trying anymore. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like and comment. I really do appreciate it all, and of all of the support there too. Can't thank you enough to keep this channel going. And I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.